My aunt tried to sell my grandfather's ranch behind my back, treated me like a useless nobody, and claimed family meant obedience. She never expected the quiet clause that turned her greed into total financial and social ruin. I, 29, male, have been working as a firefighter and paramedic for the past 8 years here in Arizona. I started right out of high school when I was 18. I went through the intensive 6-month fire academy. I worked my way up from rookie to lieutenant through pure determination and competence. It's not glamorous work, but it pays decent money, and I genuinely love helping people during their worst moments. Plus, the schedule gives me time for side projects and hobbies that keep me busy during downtime. My grandfather Frank was this absolute legend of a rancher up in Montana who everyone in the county knew and respected. Guy was seriously old school. He built his entire spread from absolutely nothing, starting back in the 1960s when land was still affordable, and a man could make something of himself through pure hard work. He bought his first 200 acres with money he'd saved working dangerous oil rig jobs in North Dakota. Then he slowly and strategically acquired neighboring properties over 5 decades, until he owned this massive 3,200-acre cattle operation that was basically its own small kingdom. We're talking serious generational wealth here that most people can only dream about. Prime grazing land that's been in agricultural use for over a century. Extensive water rights that are worth an absolute fortune in the modern drought-prone West. Mineral rights that could potentially be worth millions if the right oil or gas deposits are found. Plus all the buildings, equipment, and livestock that come with running a major cattle operation. Conservative estimates from professional agricultural appraisers put the total value around $4.2 million, but it could easily be worth significantly more to the right buyer, especially with land prices in Montana going through the roof lately due to wealthy California transplants. Frank basically raised me after my dad got killed in a horrible industrial accident when I was 14 years old. Mom couldn't handle being suddenly widowed at such a young age and kind of shut down emotionally, spending most days just staring at the television and barely speaking to anyone for months at a time. So Frank stepped up without hesitation and took me in every summer, plus most school holidays and breaks throughout the year. That man taught me everything important about life that you can't learn in school. How to repair fence lines that could stretch for miles across rough terrain. How to manage cattle herds through different seasons and weather conditions. How to balance complex books and negotiate with buyers who try to cheat you every chance they get. How to deal with veterinarians and feed suppliers and equipment dealers who all wanted to maximize their profits. He showed me what it meant to work with your hands and build something lasting that could benefit future generations of your family. Frank was tough as old leather, but absolutely fair in all his dealings with people. He had zero tolerance for lazy people, dishonest people, or anyone who expected something for nothing without putting in the work. His philosophy was simple and straightforward. Work hard every day, treat people fairly and honestly, save your money instead of wasting it on luxury nonsense. And don't trust anyone who promises easy solutions to difficult problems. Which brings me to my Aunt Sandra, who represents everything Frank despised about modern society rolled into one absolutely awful person who made everyone miserable. Sandra is my dad's younger sister, and she's never held a real job for more than 6 months in her entire 45-year adult life. Instead, she's made a highly successful career out of marrying wealthy men, staying married just long enough to qualify for significant divorce settlements under state law, then moving on to hunt for the next victim with even more money. She's been married 4 times that I know of, and she always manages to walk away with enough money to fund her next elaborate husband-hunting expedition. She's 45 now, but still acts like some spoiled teenager who thinks the world owes her a luxury lifestyle just for existing and looking reasonably attractive. During family gatherings like Christmas or Thanksgiving, Sandra would show up wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than most people make in a month, driving expensive cars that were clearly beyond her actual means, wearing jewelry that could pay off student loans, while simultaneously complaining loudly about being financially stressed and needing to borrow money from relatives for various emergencies that always seemed to involve shopping sprees or vacation expenses. Frank absolutely could not stand her entitled attitude and shameless manipulation tactics. He used to say, "That girl's got champagne taste and a beer budget, and she expects everyone else to pay for the champagne while she contributes absolutely nothing of value to anyone in this family." The woman was a walking contradiction that defied all logic, always claiming to be broke and struggling financially, but somehow always dressed like she shopped exclusively in Beverly Hills boutiques. She'd show up to Christmas dinner wearing a dress that cost $3,000 while asking to borrow money for rent payments that were supposedly overdue. So when Frank passed away last March from a massive heart attack, died quick and without suffering, exactly like he would have wanted based on conversations we'd had, I figured Sandra might inherit some token amount just to keep her from throwing a legal tantrum and making everyone's life miserable. Maybe $10,000 or $15,000, something small but meaningful enough to prevent family drama during an already difficult time. I was completely and utterly wrong about that assumption, as I was about to discover in the most dramatic way possible. The will reading took place at Frank's lawyer's office in downtown Billings on a cold Tuesday morning in late March. The lawyer had been handling Frank's legal affairs for over 20 years, solid, experienced, no-nonsense type who'd built his reputation on discretion and competence over decades of practice. Frank trusted very few people completely in his lifetime, but this guy was definitely one of them based on their long professional relationship. I showed up straight from finishing a grueling 48-hour shift at the fire station, still wearing my uniform because I'd driven directly from work and didn't have time to go home and change clothes. I was exhausted from 2 days of emergency calls, but wanted to get this legal business handled quickly so I could drive back home and get some much-needed sleep before my next shift rotation started. Sandra rolled up in a brand-new Mercedes SUV that probably cost more than my entire annual salary as a public employee, wearing some expensive-looking designer outfit that screamed money and enough gold jewelry to stock a decent-sized pawn shop. She was clearly dressed to impress, like this was some kind of important business meeting where appearances mattered more than substance. Should have been my first major red flag that something was seriously off about her expectations for this meeting. The lawyer started reading through the standard provisions that you'd expect in any normal person's will. Some money designated for local charities that Frank had supported over the years. His entire hunting rifle collection going to his old army buddy who'd served with him in Vietnam. His antique tractor left to a neighboring rancher who'd always admired it and helped Frank during busy harvest seasons. Normal will stuff that made perfect sense given Frank's relationships and values throughout his lifetime. Then the lawyer reached the main event that would change my life forever. To my grandson Jake, who has consistently demonstrated dedication, strong work ethic, and genuine respect for the land and its proper stewardship, I leave the entirety of Red Rock Ranch, including all buildings, livestock, equipment, water rights, mineral rights, and associated assets, in perpetuity. I'm sitting there trying not to completely lose my composure in front of everyone. I knew Frank loved me and was proud of my work ethic and character, but inheriting the entire ranch, that's serious generational wealth right there. Life-changing money that could set up my future kids and grandkids for success and financial security. I was thinking about how to thank him properly, even though he couldn't hear me anymore. But before I could even fully process what had just happened or say anything appropriate to acknowledge this incredible gift, Sandra opens her mouth with the most outrageous statement I've ever heard from another human being. Obviously, we'll need to sell the entire property immediately. Jake doesn't know the first thing about managing a business operation this size and complexity, just like that. Not congratulations, or Frank would be so proud, or anything resembling normal human decency or acknowledgement that this was my inheritance that had nothing to do with her. Straight to we need to sell it, like she had any legal standing whatsoever in this situation. I stared at her in complete disbelief, wondering if I'd misheard something. Excuse me, what did you just say? She gives me this incredibly condescending smile like I'm some confused child who doesn't understand basic economics, and says, "Sweetheart, you're a firefighter. This ranch is worth millions of dollars. You'll run it straight into the ground within a year because you don't have the business experience or industry connections. I've already been in preliminary discussions with some very serious real estate development companies who are extremely interested in acquiring this type of premium property for major projects." The absolute, unbelievable audacity of this woman hit me like a slap in the face. She's already been shopping around my inheritance to potential buyers before Frank's even been buried for a full week. While I was dealing with funeral arrangements and grieving the loss of the most important person in my life, she was apparently making phone calls to developers and planning how to spend money that wasn't hers. "I think there's been some major confusion here," I told her as firmly as possible without raising my voice. "The ranch belongs to me, not us, not we, me. Exclusively and completely." She actually laughed out loud like I just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard in her life. "Oh, honey, family doesn't work that way in the real world. We'll obviously split everything equally after the sale, because that's what makes sense for everyone involved. I've got the business connections and market knowledge to get top dollar for this property. You'd probably sell it for half what it's actually worth because you don't understand real estate markets." That's when the lawyer cleared his throat meaningfully and reached into his briefcase to pull out another envelope. This one was noticeably thick, official-looking, and sealed with Frank's personal wax stamp that he used for important documents. Actually, Sandra, before we continue any further with this discussion, Frank left very specific and detailed instructions regarding any potential interference with Jake's inheritance rights. The lawyer carefully broke the wax seal with appropriate ceremony and began reading in his measured professional tone. If Sandra is attempting to insert herself into any decisions regarding Red Rock Ranch or pressuring Jake in any way about the property, then she has conclusively proven that my lifelong assessment of her character was absolutely correct and justified. Sandra's confident smile started to falter noticeably as the implications of those words began sinking in. The lawyer continued reading from Frank's carefully prepared statement. Sandra has spent her entire adult life searching for shortcuts and expecting other people to fund her extravagant lifestyle choices. She has never contributed anything of value to this family except drama and financial demands. If she is pressuring Jake in any way regarding the ranch or its future, she will immediately forfeit the $50,000 I had originally designated for her. Plus, she will be legally required to repay all outstanding loans I have made to her over the years, calculated with appropriate compound interest. The room went completely silent. You could literally hear a pin drop. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "What loans are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused because I had no idea Frank had been lending Sandra money over the years. The lawyer pulled out a detailed leather-bound ledger that looked like it had been meticulously maintained for years. Every entry was in Frank's careful handwriting with dates, amounts, and purposes clearly documented. According to Frank's comprehensive records, Sandra borrowed $127,000 over the past 15 years. This includes down payments for multiple vehicles, credit card debt consolidation payments, rent assistance during various housing transitions, legal fees from multiple divorce proceedings, medical bills, and various other emergency funds that she requested. None of these amounts were ever repaid despite repeated promises and payment schedules. Sandra's face went absolutely white. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Those weren't loans. That was family helping family during difficult times. He never expected me to pay that back. Frank maintained detailed documentation for each transaction, including signed promissory notes with your signature, the lawyer replied calmly, flipping through pages of evidence. At current market interest rates compounded annually, the total amount owed to the estate is $183,000. Now Sandra was getting visibly angry, really angry. Her face was turning red and her hands were starting to shake noticeably. "This is completely ridiculous. He can't do this to me. I'll contest the entire will immediately." The lawyer didn't even blink or show any surprise. "You're certainly welcome to pursue that legal approach." Frank anticipated that possibility as well and prepared accordingly. He pulled out yet another legal document from his seemingly endless briefcase. Any legal challenge to this will initiated by Sandra will result in immediate enforcement of all outstanding debts with penalties. Plus, she'll be held financially responsible for all legal fees incurred in defending the will's validity, regardless of the outcome. I'm starting to realize that Frank had been planning this exact scenario for years, probably decades. He knew exactly who Sandra was, how she'd react to being cut out of any significant inheritance, and what tactics she'd likely employ. The man had been 3 steps ahead of her the entire time, like a chess master planning moves far in advance. Sandra stood up abruptly, practically shaking with rage and disbelief. "You ungrateful little jerk," she said, pointing directly at me with obvious hatred. "After everything I've done for this family over the years." "Like what exactly?" I asked calmly. "Name one specific thing you've actually done for this family besides take money and cause drama." She couldn't answer. She literally stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water before storming out of the office, but not before yelling that this wasn't over, and she'd make sure I regretted this decision for the rest of my life. Turns out she was absolutely right about that part. The war was just beginning, and I had no idea how dirty she was willing to fight. I figured Sandra would cool off after a few days of thinking clearly and eventually accept reality like a normal adult would. Shows how much I knew about dealing with truly entitled people who've never faced real consequences for their actions in their entire lives. Within exactly 1 week of the will reading, my phone started ringing constantly from dawn until late at night. Real estate agents, land development companies, investment firms, mineral rights speculators, luxury home builders, all wanting to make me an offer I couldn't possibly refuse on the ranch property. The calls were absolutely relentless and incredibly annoying. Some California investor offered me $3.8 million cash with no inspection required and a 30-day closing. Another company wanted to purchase just the mineral rights for $2 million upfront. A luxury housing developer wanted to transform the entire ranch into an exclusive residential community for wealthy retirees, offering $4.5 million for the land alone. Every single caller mentioned that they'd heard I might be motivated to sell quickly, or that someone in the family had already reached out to them with preliminary information about the property becoming available soon. Sandra was clearly orchestrating an artificial feeding frenzy, hoping I'd get overwhelmed by constant pressure and just accept whatever offer seemed biggest without doing proper research or getting independent appraisals. But I'm not some naive kid who falls for obvious manipulation tactics. Working as a firefighter teaches you to stay calm under pressure and think clearly during chaotic situations. When someone's trying to rush you into making major life decisions, it's usually because they don't want you thinking things through carefully. So I told every caller the exact same thing. The property is not for sale at any price. Please remove this number from your contact list immediately. That's when Sandra decided to escalate her tactics significantly and get really creative with her schemes. The following weekend, I drove up to the ranch to check on operations and meet with the employees. Frank had employed several experienced ranch hands to manage day-to-day activities like feeding cattle, maintaining fences, and handling equipment maintenance. I wanted to discuss continuing current arrangements and possibly expanding operations. When I arrived at the main gate, there was a complete professional surveying crew on my property. 4 guys, with expensive equipment, systematically marking property boundaries and taking detailed measurements of buildings and land features. I walked up to the crew supervisor and asked what exactly they were doing on my private land without permission. "We're here to survey this property for potential subdivision development," he explained matter-of-factly. "Sandra Williams hired our company last week. She told us she's the new legal owner and needs detailed surveys for development planning. I had to show them copies of the will documents and my identification to convince them to pack up their equipment and leave immediately." But that was just the beginning of Sandra's escalating fraud campaign. Over the next month, I had to deal with an absolutely incredible series of incidents that got progressively more outrageous. A demolition crew showed up to begin removing the old barn structure because Sandra had told them it needed to be cleared for new construction projects. County zoning inspectors arrived wanting to discuss proposed changes for residential development applications that Sandra had apparently filed without authorization. A livestock buyer tried to load up my cattle onto transport trucks because Sandra had sold them the entire herd for quick cash to some meat processing company. Environmental consultants wanted to conduct comprehensive soil testing for development suitability assessments that Sandra had scheduled and prepaid every single time Sandra had told these people she either owned the property outright or was legally authorized to act on behalf of the owner. I constantly had to produce legal documentation proving these people were being actively scammed by someone with no legal authority. The woman was basically committing systematic fraud on a weekly basis, using my property as her personal playground for various money-making schemes. It was absolutely infuriating and incredibly time-consuming to deal with while trying to maintain my regular job responsibilities. Finally, Sandra made her intentions completely official and stopped pretending this was just family drama. I got served with formal legal papers. She was officially contesting the will, claiming Frank was mentally incompetent when he wrote it and that I had somehow unduly influenced him against his better judgment. Her legal argument was that Frank was suffering from undiagnosed dementia during his final years, completely false. That I had intentionally isolated him from other family members to manipulate him, total nonsense. And that the ranch should be sold with proceeds split equally between all surviving family members, meaning just her since we were literally the only family left. Now, I had to hire my own expensive lawyer and deal with court dates while trying to maintain my demanding firefighting career and properly manage a massive ranch operation that I was still learning about. The stress was absolutely killing me, and I was burning through my life savings on legal fees that kept piling up week after week. Sandra showed up to every single court hearing, dressed like she was filming a reality TV show, complete with professional makeup and crocodile tears, about how poor Frank was taken advantage of during his vulnerable final years, and how the family ranch should benefit the entire family, not just one selfish person. She even had the absolute nerve to bring up my deceased father multiple times, claiming he would have wanted his sister to be taken care of financially and that I was dishonoring his memory by being selfish with the inheritance that should be shared equally. That particular accusation really got under my skin because my dad would have been absolutely disgusted by Sandra's manipulative behavior and shameless money-grabbing tactics. But here's where Sandra made a massive strategic mistake that ultimately destroyed her case. During one lengthy deposition session, she got overconfident and started running her mouth extensively about all the improvements she'd make to the ranch when she won the court case. She talked in great detail about selling off all the cattle immediately for quick cash, subdividing the prime grazing land into smaller residential parcels that could be sold to developers, maybe keeping one small section for herself to build a family compound where she could entertain wealthy gentlemen friends. She basically laid out her entire plan to completely destroy everything Frank had spent 50 years building. Our lawyer recorded every single word of her detailed destruction fantasy, and it became crucial evidence that her motives were purely financial rather than based on any genuine concern for family legacy. Meanwhile, I was getting regular reports from the ranch employees that Sandra had been showing up at the property multiple times per week with different men, wealthy-looking older gentlemen in expensive luxury cars who clearly had money to spend. She was giving them personal tours of all the facilities, discussing development potential and investment opportunities, acting like she already owned the place, and was shopping for business partners or investors. That's when I realized this wasn't simply about inheritance money for Sandra. She was actively using the ranch as bait to try landing another wealthy husband. She was literally conducting sugar daddy auditions while simultaneously trying to steal my inheritance through the court system. The woman's audacity and shamelessness were absolutely breathtaking. She had no boundaries whatsoever and would clearly stop at nothing to get what she wanted. The court case dragged on for several more months, costing me a fortune in legal fees and causing tremendous stress that was affecting my job performance and personal relationships. But then my lawyer discovered something extremely interesting during the mandatory financial disclosure process. Since Sandra was claiming poverty and requesting court-appointed legal assistance, her complete financial records became available for detailed review. What we found was absolutely stunning and explained everything about her desperate behavior. Sandra wasn't just temporarily broke, she was drowning in an ocean of debt that was getting deeper every month. Credit cards maxed out at over $300,000 across multiple banks, several personal loans in default status with payments that were months behind. She'd been evicted from 2 different apartments in the past year alone for non-payment of rent. The Mercedes she'd driven to the will reading, repossession agents were actively searching for it. But the really fascinating part was tracking exactly where her money had been going over the past several years. Monthly trips to Las Vegas casinos where she'd blow thousands of dollars in single weekends. High-end shopping sprees at luxury boutiques for designer clothes and accessories. Expensive restaurants and 5-star hotels for impressing potential wealthy boyfriends. She was living like a millionaire while being hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. My lawyer investigated further and discovered that Sandra had been systematically telling creditors and potential lenders that she was about to inherit a multi-million-dollar ranch. She'd been using that fictional future inheritance to secure credit cards, convince wealthy men to pay for her extravagant lifestyle, and even take out high-interest loans against her guaranteed inheritance. She wasn't just entitled and greedy, she was completely desperate and living in a fantasy world. If she didn't get substantial money from the ranch very soon, her entire elaborate house of cards would collapse spectacularly, and she'd face serious legal consequences. That's when the court case took a dramatic and decisive turn in my favor. The judge ordered a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation to definitively determine whether Frank was mentally competent when he wrote his final will. The results were absolutely brutal for Sandra's case and destroyed any remaining credibility she might have had. Not only was Frank completely mentally sharp right up until the day he died, but the evaluating psychiatrist specifically noted that the will showed careful consideration and detailed long-term planning that clearly suggests a rational desire to prevent financially irresponsible family members from squandering a lifetime's worth of accumulated assets. Case dismissed with prejudice. Sandra was ordered to pay my legal fees totaling $50,000, plus the original $183,000 debt to Frank's estate, plus additional penalties for filing a frivolous lawsuit that wasted court time and resources. But I wasn't anywhere near done with her yet. The real fun was just beginning, and Sandra had no idea what was coming next. After the court case ended decisively in my favor, I initially thought Sandra would finally disappear and attempt to rebuild her life somewhere else like a normal person would. But this woman was far too stupid and entitled to recognize when she was completely beaten. Instead of accepting defeat gracefully and moving on, She started an aggressive campaign to destroy my reputation around town and make my life miserable. She spread malicious rumors that I had stolen the ranch through elaborate fraud and elder abuse. She contacted local news stations trying to convince them to investigate a story about family theft and inheritance manipulation. She even showed up at the fire station multiple times, trying to convince my colleagues and supervisors that I was a criminal who shouldn't be trusted in emergency situations. The final straw was when she started calling my current girlfriend, trying to convince her that I was some kind of dangerous psychopath who had manipulated an elderly man. That crossed a line that I wasn't going to tolerate under any circumstances. That's when I decided Sandra needed to learn a permanent lesson about consequences and accountability that she'd never forget for the rest of her miserable life. During the legal discovery process, I'd obtained copies of all her financial records, personal information, and business dealings. Every debt, every scam, every lie she'd told to obtain money or credit over the years. And I knew exactly how to use that comprehensive information most effectively to destroy her completely. First, I systematically contacted every single creditor she owed money to and provided them with her current address, phone number, and place of employment. She'd been lying to all of them about her location and income status to avoid collections. Within 1 week, she was getting served with multiple wage garnishment orders and collection lawsuits that would follow her for years. Then, I contacted the Internal Revenue Service with detailed documentation about her financial activities over the past decade. Turns out Sandra hadn't been paying taxes on all that borrowed money she'd been living on for years. The government was extremely interested to learn about her substantial unreported income and fraudulent financial activities. Tax evasion is a federal crime that carries serious penalties, including potential prison time. Next, I reached out to the repossession company that had been searching for her Mercedes for months. Amazing how easy it becomes to locate a vehicle when you provide them with someone's exact work schedule and home address. They recovered it within 48 hours while she was working her part-time retail job. But the most devastating blow was systematically exposing her online dating activities to everyone she knew. Sandra maintained active profiles on multiple sugar daddy websites, consistently advertising herself as a soon-to-be ranch heiress, seeking a generous gentleman companion for mutually beneficial arrangements. I took detailed screenshots of every profile and conversation and sent them to every wealthy man she'd been dating, along with complete documentation of her real financial situation and criminal court cases. I also sent the screenshots to her employer, her landlord, her church, and basically everyone in her social circle. Let them all see exactly who Sandra really was when she thought nobody was watching. The reaction was swift and brutal. Her employer fired her immediately for misrepresenting herself and bringing scandal to their business. Her landlord started eviction proceedings. Her church asked her to stop attending. Even her few remaining friends distanced themselves completely. Within 2 months, Sandra's entire carefully constructed life fell apart completely and spectacularly. Evicted from her apartment with nowhere to go. Car repossessed in broad daylight while she was at work. All credit cards canceled immediately. Bank accounts frozen by court order. And every wealthy man she'd been manipulating dumped her instantly when they discovered she was not only broke, but facing serious legal consequences. The cherry on top was when the IRS seized her remaining assets to cover back taxes and penalties. She literally had nothing left except the clothes on her back. That's when my phone rang late one evening with a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Jake, please, I desperately need your help," Sandra said, crying harder than I'd ever heard anyone cry in my life. "I'm completely homeless. I'm sleeping in my friend's car. I have nowhere to go and no money for food. Please, we're supposed to be family." "Family?" I replied calmly. "You mean like when you tried to steal my inheritance? Or when you called me an ungrateful jerk? Or when you spent months trying to destroy my reputation and career? Or when you harassed my girlfriend?" She started sobbing even harder. "I made terrible mistakes, okay? I was desperate and scared. But I'll lose absolutely everything if you don't help me now. I'm begging you. I'll do anything." "You already lost everything," I told her matter-of-factly. That was exactly the point of this entire exercise. For the next 10 minutes, she begged me pathetically to drop the debt collection efforts, to give her any kind of job at the ranch, to loan her money for an apartment deposit, or even just food money. She promised she'd completely changed as a person, that she'd learned her lesson, that she'd do absolutely anything to make things right between us. She even offered to work for free at the ranch, to sign over any future inheritance rights. to publicly apologize for everything she'd done. The desperation in her voice was almost pathetic enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. I listened patiently to her entire desperate plea, then delivered my final response. Sandra, you spent your entire adult life taking advantage of people who cared about you. You treated Frank like a personal ATM machine. You tried to steal the ranch he worked 50 years to build from scratch. You called me names, spread vicious lies about me, and actively tried to destroy my career and reputation. You harassed my girlfriend and made my life hell for months. You had countless opportunities to be a decent human being, and instead you consistently chose to be a greedy, entitled parasite who contributed nothing of value to anyone. So here's exactly what's going to happen moving forward. You're going to pay back every single penny you owe Frank's estate, even if it takes you the rest of your miserable life. You're going to stay completely away from me, my girlfriend, my career, and my ranch. And you're going to figure out how to survive in this world without taking advantage of anyone else ever again. But Jake, I'll literally die on the streets. You should have considered that possibility before you tried to destroy the one person who might have been willing to help you. I hung up and immediately blocked her number from all my devices. Last I heard through mutual acquaintances, Sandra was working the night shift at a gas station in Billings, living in a tiny studio apartment that cost more than half her minimum wage paycheck. She lost about 40 pounds from stress and poor nutrition, looks 10 years older than she did a year ago, and has completely given up on trying to maintain her previous lifestyle. Her sugar daddy hunting days are permanently over, her scamming career is finished, and her entitled princess act has been completely destroyed forever. She'll be paying off debts for the rest of her life, and will never again have the luxury lifestyle she thought she deserved.